What if a single unarmed woman, armed only with wick, banana bread, and a mother in a floral cardigan, could unravel an entire galactic justice system in just 20 seconds? This isn't a story about war, it's a story about words, about heart, and about how one human made the universe question everything it thought it knew about order. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and show some love with a thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's jump into the story. Naomi Treller never imagined her day would start with diplomatic tea and end with alien handcuffs. One minute she was offering a toast to peace between two star systems that previously couldn't agree on the color of neutral territory, and next, she was surrounded by a dozen armored guards with stun rifles and matching frowns. The arrest came swiftly, with the kind of drama reserved for public trials and soap operas. Naomi, dressed in her usual no-nonsense black blazer and boots that had walked through 7 peace treaties, didn't resist. She raised her hands slowly, looked around at the startled crowd of delegates, and said with a smirk, "You're going to want popcorn for this." Commander Dalvik, head of the Galactic Regulators and possessor of the galaxy's most impressive shoulder pads, stepped forward with a glare that could crack solar glass. He held up a digital arrest warrant with glowing glyphs that pulsed like a heartbeat. "Naomi Treller," he said, his voice low and humorless, "you are under arrest for destabilizing diplomatic order, inciting emotional volatility, and unauthorized use of cultural irony." The crowd gasped. Someone in the back actually dropped a cup of synthesized tea. Naomi blinked. "Is that even a real law?" Dalvik didn't answer. Instead, he motioned to his officers, who struggled awkwardly with the restraints clearly designed for creatures with more than 2 arms. Naomi didn't make it easy. She offered her wrists with exaggerated patience and said, "I'd help, but I left my manual on alien arrest procedures for the slightly sarcastic back on Earth." The cuffs finally clicked into place, a snug fit over her vintage Earth-made wristwatch. One of the guards tried to adjust it, and Naomi hissed, "Easy with that. It survived 3 interplanetary negotiations and 1 unfortunate curry spill." No one laughed. Apparently, humor wasn't in the regulator's training program that she was led through the halls of the Galactic Assembly's flagship, a floating monument of glass, marble, and rules. The ship, known as the Unity Spire, buzzed with activity, but as Naomi passed by, silence followed her like a shadow. Delegates and aides watched with wide eyes and parted respectfully, unsure whether to bow or hide. After all, Naomi Treller wasn't just a diplomat, she was a headline. Her talent for diffusing planetary tensions with sharp wit and 2 honest observations had made her either a genius or a walking disaster, depending on who you asked. Inside the tribunal chamber, the tension was thick enough to chew. The room was circular, lit by soft blue panels that glowed like underwater light. 12 council members sat behind desks shaped like waves or bones or trees, representing 12 species who had somehow agreed to share power without throwing meteors at each other. Naomi was guided to the center chair, still cuffed and pushed down gently by one of the officers. She didn't resist. She crossed her legs neatly and waited. Counselor Myrmex, a tall, insectoid figure with wings that buzzed every time he spoke, leaned into his microphone. His translator implant turned his words into a soothing, if slightly bored, voice in Naomi's ear. "Ambassador Treller, do you understand the charges brought against you?" "I understand them," she said. "I just don't understand how you kept a straight face while writing them down." A few council members shifted uncomfortably. An ambassador from a sentient gas species flickered slightly, a sign of amusement or distress. It was hard to tell. "You stand accused of manipulating proceedings through use of language, causing 3 emotional breakdowns, and reducing 2 seasoned negotiators to what our reports describe as existential sobbing." Naomi tilted her head. "You mean when I said the Breathorian's tie looked like a decorative napkin from a wedding buffet?" That incident resulted in 47 minutes of uncontainable weeping and the melting of a ceremonial table. Myrmex replied. He asked for feedback, Naomi said, shrugging as best she could with her hands cuffed. Also, that table was ugly. Silence hung in the air. Then a quiet voice near the edge of the chamber added. She also introduced the concept of sarcasm to the people. Of Junior Prime. That's called education, Naomi replied. You taught them to say one thing and mean another. They were too literal. A joke or two won't kill them. Myrmex shuffled some digital papers on his glowing desk. It sparked a planetary. Panic, Naomi raised an eyebrow. You're welcome. Dalvik stepped forward again, eyes flashing. This is not a game. You're being held responsible for infecting diplomacy with Earth-style irreverence and disorder. Naomi smiled, just slightly. Maybe diplomacy needed a little shaking up. The council murmured. They weren't ready for her kind of rebellion, not the kind that came with sharp words and open smiles, instead of weapons and war. She was dangerous, yes, but not in the way anyone could quite measure. As the tribunal prepared to deliver its judgment, Naomi leaned back in her chair, wristwatch glinting under the lights. Any chance I get a snack while we do this? She asked lightly. Galactic law says I'm entitled to at least a protein bar and a glass of weird blue liquid, right? No one answered. But somewhere, someone was beginning to wonder whether the real threat wasn't Naomi Treller herself, but the idea that truth could be wrapped in jokes. And that one woman with the wrong attitude might be exactly what the galaxy needed, and the galaxy wasn't ready for what or who was coming next. The tribunal chamber was filled with silence, the kind that usually came just before something terrible or historic happened. Naomi Treller sat calmly in the middle of the room, still cuffed, surrounded by 12 alien representatives, each of them staring at her like she'd grown an extra head. Her words had stirred something confusion, maybe doubt, but not enough to change the course. The verdict was coming, and everyone knew it. Then the door at the far end of the chamber let out a soft buzz, followed by a long, slow hiss as it opened. In stepped a small woman in a floral cardigan, orthopedic sandals, and a bright smile that didn't seem to care about the tension in the room. Her silver hair was pinned into a tight bun, and she carried a large tin in one hand and a well-worn leather handbag in the other. The guards at the entrance hesitated, then stepped aside, not quite sure why. She walked in like she owned the place, or at least like she had something far more important to do than ask for permission. Naomi's eyes lit up the moment she saw her. Mom, she said, eyebrows raised. The woman smiled wider. There's my girl, she said in a warm, steady voice. Didn't expect such nice carpets. I almost wore my gardening clogs. Commander Dalvik stood abruptly. This is a secure chamber. Unauthorized entry is I brought banana bread, the woman said, holding up the tin with both hands. No preservatives, just real butter and a bit of nutmeg. Dalvik blinked, clearly unsure how to respond. Martha Treller, Naomi's mother, walked forward slowly, placing the tin gently on the nearest council desk. One of the ambassadors, a pale blue blob-like creature, leaned in curiously. Counselor Myrmex adjusted his translator and leaned forward. May we ask who you are? Martha turned to him with the same calm expression she might use at a church bake sale. I'm Naomi's mother. I'm also her registered cultural support companion. I filed the paperwork under Clause 4.9b. 3 days ago, triple stamped. A sudden wave of murmuring passed through the council. The clause was obscure but valid. It allowed any diplomat under duress to request emotional or psychological support, usually handled by licensed professionals, not cardigan-wearing Midwesterners with baked goods. Dalvik quickly checked his wrist console. His mandibles twitched. It checks out. Naomi grinned, still cuffed but clearly enjoying the show. Told you I had backup. The floating ambassador from the vapor species gave a low hum. Is she trained in intergalactic mediation? No, Martha said, calmly setting her purse down. But I raised 3 kids through middle school. This'll be easier. She took a step toward Naomi and gently examined the cuffs around her. Daughter's wrists. These too tight, honey? They're fine, Naomi said. Just a little awkward during dramatic speeches. One of the council members, a tall plant-like being with glowing leaves, leaned forward. She seems unconventional. She's Texan, Naomi said. It's a setting, not a personality. Martha looked around at the council, her eyes kind but sharp. Now I know this is all very official and serious, but you've locked up my daughter for using her words. And where I come from, that usually earns you a school ribbon, not a tribunal hearing. Dalvik's frustration was starting to show. You are interfering with a formal process. This is a serious situation. Martha nodded. And I take it seriously. That's why I also brought her allergy medicine, a notebook, and a list of things she needs to bring back from Earth next time she visits. Someone near the back of the room snorted. It was hard to tell who. Naomi sat back in her chair, watching her mother with a mix of awe and amusement. Martha didn't raise her voice. Didn't argue. She just made herself at home in the center of the most powerful courtroom in the galaxy, like it was a PTA meeting. The jelly-like ambassador sniffed, loudly. She reminds me of my hatch mother, he said. Kind, but able to terrify entire. Council rooms. Martha smiled and reached into her purse again. Anyone want a lemon cookie? They're a bit crumbly, but I promise they'll brighten your day. Councillor Myrmex, still trying to maintain order, cleared his throat. Madam Treller, this is highly unorthodox. I'm aware, Martha replied cheerfully. But from what I've seen, your idea of orthodox involves locking people up for telling the truth with a bit of humor. I'd say a little unorthodox might be just what you need. The council looked at each other, uncertain. The walls of order and structure that had always kept things in line were wobbling slightly. Not because of a rebellion, or a riot, or a weapon, but because of banana bread, homemade wisdom, and a mother's quiet refusal to be intimidated. Naomi watched. The council, the guards, the stiff faces trying not to show emotion. She leaned toward her mother and whispered, You're doing something to them. Martha nodded slowly. They've got rules, but no rhythm. We'll fix that. At that moment, the tribunal no longer felt so powerful. The room was still filled with aliens of every kind. The laws still glowed on the screens, and Naomi's hands were still bound. But the air had shifted. Martha hadn't come with an army or a defense team. She came with cookies, kindness, and confidence in her daughter. And that was enough to make the galaxy tremble. They hadn't seen the last of Martha Treller. And more importantly, they had no idea how to handle her. The room hadn't spoken for a full minute. That alone was strange. This was a tribunal chamber. After all, a place where words usually flew faster than starships. But right now, the 12 council members just stared at the woman in the floral cardigan as she calmly placed slices of banana bread on delicate crystal plates that were probably designed for ceremonial fruit, not homemade desserts. Naomi Treller, still cuffed but sitting a little straighter now, watched her mother work the room with quiet purpose. The tension, once sharp and unbreakable, had started to bend. Councillor Myrmex, the insectoid with twitchy antennae and an allergy to surprises, finally cleared his throat. Madam Treller, while we appreciate your hospitality, we must return to the charges against your daughter. Martha didn't flinch. She picked up a laminated card from her purse and adjusted her reading glasses. Of course. I've prepared a few points. Color-coded. Naomi raised an eyebrow. You made note cards? You think I raised 3 children without color-coded note cards? Martha said without looking up. I had binders on you before you could spell existential. There was a rustle across the tribunal. Some delegates looked at each other. Others, more curious than concerned now, leaned forward slightly. They'd expected an argument, maybe even an outburst. They hadn't expected a speech in a soft voice and Wisconsin vowels, backed by a tray of baked goods. "I understand that Naomi is charged with emotional disruption," Martha began, her tone calm but firm. "And I'd like to point out that disrupting stagnant emotions isn't always a crime. Sometimes it's the first step to real change." She paused, giving her words time to sink in. "You've accused her of teaching sarcasm, of making officials laugh at inappropriate moments, and of questioning tradition. But tradition without reflection turns into fear. And fear, left unchecked, turns into silence. That's not peace, it's just the absence of noise." Naomi blinked. That line wasn't in any law book, but it hit harder than any formal defense. Counselor Vesh, a tall creature made entirely of shifting crystals, tilted his head. "You are implying that emotional discomfort is necessary." "I'm saying it's natural," Martha said. When Naomi told that ambassador his tie looked like a melted circus tent, it may have stung. But it also made him think, maybe even laugh. And laughter, as inconvenient as it might be, can be the first sign of connection. Commander Dalvik stood, clearly uncomfortable. "This is a court, not a kitchen. We deal in codes, not casseroles." "And yet here we are," Martha replied. "Because your codes didn't prepare you for someone like Naomi, and they certainly didn't prepare you for someone like me." Another quiet ripple spread across the chamber. No one was sure whether to object or ask for another slice of banana bread. The gelatinous ambassador, known as Olak, who had previously sniffled at the sight of Martha, now raised a slimy pseudopod. "She reminds me of the firekeepers from our ancestral myths. The ones who didn't lead armies or invent weapons, but who fed people and asked hard questions." Myrmex adjusted his files with a twitch. "That is not relevant to intergalactic law, but it might be relevant to intergalactic peace," Ulek said softly. Martha flipped to another card. "Let's talk results. Naomi's missions have ended 3 border disputes, prevented a diplomatic duel, and stopped 2 different planets from accidentally declaring war over a translation error. She also triggered a minor panic," Myrmex reminded her. "Because she told the truth," Martha replied. "Sometimes truth is messy. It doesn't mean it's wrong." Naomi watched, stunned but also a little proud. Her mother wasn't raising. Her voice wasn't arguing, she was just explaining. And the council was listening. Somehow, the banana bread and the gentle tone were doing more than Naomi's carefully rehearsed speeches ever had. Head Archivist Pellin, a thin android who had been silently recording everything, spoke for the first time. A note for the record. Several security officers have recently been observed quoting Ambassador Treller's phrases. One used the term "don't start none, won't be none" during a patrol debriefing. Dalvik's mandibles clicked. Contagion. Martha tilted her head, or maybe influence. "It's disruption," Dalvik insisted. "A soft creeping disruption of order," Naomi smiled. "Isn't that what diplomacy is? A quiet change in direction?" Counselor Terval, a thick-scaled creature with a deep voice, finally spoke up. "There is no protocol for this situation, no precedent. No rulebook that covers a mother's lecture as a legal defense." "That's your problem, not mine," Martha said gently. "You wrote the rules. You left the doors open. You didn't expect someone like me to walk through them." The room went quiet again. No shouting, no banging of desks. Just quiet understanding, spreading like a slow light through the chamber. Naomi looked around and saw it. Eyes softening, minds opening, the lawbook pages flipping somewhere deep inside each delegate's head. The system wasn't broken. It was just unused to voices that didn't sound official. And that's when she realized something. They were winning, not with force, not with threats, but with baked goods, laminated notes, and the unwavering voice of someone who believed being kind wasn't weakness, it was the beginning of a new kind of strength. The smell of banana bread still lingered in the tribunal chamber when the sirens began. At first, it was just a soft beep and alert no one paid much attention to. But then came the full-blown alarm, shrill, human-designed, and unmistakably dramatic. Naomi Treller flinched. That sound she knew too well. It was an old Earth panic protocol, something from the 1980s, complete with high-pitched tones and a mechanical voice warning of imminent emotional breach. Martha, her mother, didn't even blink. She was standing at the refreshments table, pouring something steaming from a silver thermos into a paper cup. As if sirens were just part of a normal Wednesday, the tribunal chamber doors burst open, and a wave of armored security drones rolled in, their metallic limbs clanking in sharp, threatening rhythm. At their center marched a young alien officer with sharp features and a tighter uniform than necessary. He looked furious, the way only someone with too much authority and not enough understanding could look. "Ambassador Naomi Treller," he announced loudly, pointing a pulse rifle directly at her chest. "You are hereby classified as a Class C subversive entity. You are to be detained immediately." A ripple of gasps went through the room. Council members stood up in confusion. Councillor Myrmex buzzed nervously, and Ambassador Ulek let out a soft, wet whimper. Naomi rose slowly. From her chair, eyes focused, voice calm. "And here I thought we were just getting to the good part." The officer stepped forward. "This comes directly from the Central Enforcement Corps. Your influence has spread beyond containment. You've infected communication channels, disrupted protocol structures, and caused unauthorized laughter during official negotiations." "I see," Naomi said. "And skipping the hearing altogether? Is that a new enforcement trend or just lazy paperwork?" The officer ignored her and looked to the council. "I demand immediate transfer of custody. The tribunal's authority is being overridden." Martha took one slow sip from her thermos and placed it on the edge of the desk. "You're interrupting our tea," she said softly. The officer's eyes flicked toward her. "You are not part of this. Stand down." "I never stand down," Martha said, stepping in front of Naomi, "especially when my daughter's being treated like a virus for teaching manners and common sense." The officer raised the rifle a little higher. "You will remove yourself." Martha didn't move. "Son," she said evenly, "I've faced down 3 PTA boards, 1 angry moose, and a mayor with a grudge. You think that toy scares me?" The drones edged forward, but Councillor Turville slammed his heavy hand on the table. "This is still a legal hearing. You can't barge in with guns and override a lawful council." "The council is compromised," the officer shot back. "She's turned you all into sympathizers," Myrmex buzzed anxiously. "There has been no vote, no decision." She made Ambassador Gleave chuckle at a funeral. The officer shouted, clearly reaching. "I sent a sympathy card afterward," Naomi said, with a tasteful quote. "Enough," he barked. "This isn't a debate." But no one moved. Not even the drones, who seemed slightly confused by the sudden breakdown of authority. Martha turned slowly to face the room, picking up her thermos again. "You all have a choice," she said. "Follow the same tired pattern, or let something new in. Something that's not afraid of emotions, of mistakes, of growth." The officer was trembling now, but with uncertainty more than anger. His grip on the rifle was tight, but his orders had clearly met resistance for the first time. Naomi stepped beside her mother. "I never asked to change anything," she said. "But once the truth gets in, it's hard to keep the old rules standing. People laugh, people think. Sometimes that's all it takes." A soft sniffle came from Uluk again. "They make diplomacy feel alive." Councillor Vesh flickered with inner light. "I believe it is time we rewrite the protocol." The officer hesitated. "You'd let them go?" "We'd let them lead," Turville said. The officer stared, then slowly lowered his weapon. "I was just following the code." Martha patted his arm gently. "Then maybe it's time to write. A better one. The drones backed away, the alarms silenced. Naomi exhaled, not in relief but in quiet awe. This wasn't a victory built on loud arguments or threats. It was one with steady hands, warm bread, and a voice that reminded people they could choose better. Later, as the tribunal gathered for a formal statement, Naomi's charges were dropped. Not erased, but acknowledged as a turning point. Martha Truller, by council vote, was added to the diplomatic registry as an official cultural advisor, a title she accepted with mild surprise, and a promise to host monthly baking seminars for interspecies understanding. As they walked out of the chamber, side by side, Naomi leaned in. You know, you just accidentally rebooted the Galactic Council. Martha took a sip from her thermos. Sometimes all it takes is the right ingredients. And somewhere deep in the archives of the Central Enforcement Corps, a new rule was quietly added to the Galactic Code. Never underestimate a woman with a thermos and a purpose.